It's estimated that about 1/4 of the population suffers from allergies of some kind. Antihistamines are commonly prescribed to those affected.
They are tablets taken by people who have allergic problems, and they have the great advantage that one tablet taken by mouth will work at all the sites in the body where there is an allergic reaction.
In a study to be published tomorrow in the Journal of the US National Cancer Institute, researchers at the Manitoba Institute of Cell Biology in Winnipeg report that cancer tumours grow faster and larger in mice injected with 3 antihistamines. They were loratadine, astimizole and hydroxyzine. However, Dr Sutherland says the relevance to humans is yet to be proven.
My concern is that it is an unexpected finding. I think there are many reasons to believe it may not be applicable to humans, and yet there's going to be a lot of people out there today who are going to be frightened.
Dr Sutherland is warning people who use antihistamines not to panic.
I think it's appropriate that great urgency be accorded to sorting this question out, but in the meantime I think people should stay on their medication.
Jane Anderson, NBN News. Charlie Ling was walking his 2 dogs through the Newcastle suburb of Lambton just before 6 o'clock on Saturday night when power lines came down, narrowly missing him.
The post just flashed all like crackers going off. I was only 3 foot off it.
Charlie says he's lucky to be alive. At the same time, in the surrounding area, at least 65 houses and businesses experienced a sudden surge of electricity. Thousands of dollars in televisions, refrigerators and other electrical goods were damaged. Resident Peter Hedges was upset that for almost a week Shortland Electricity wouldn't agree to compensate those affected. What did they tell you when you rang them?
Oh, well, pass the buck. Simple as that. Just wild goose chase, that's what it was.
Today, Corporate Secretary John Griffith said Shortland Electricity would pay for the damage.
We will either pay to have them repaired or replaced, whichever the case may be.
Welcome news for those who haven't been able to afford to replace fridges and heaters.
Jessica, this is on behalf of the ambulance service for the brave action that you took in helping your mum on that day. About that.
As well as a certificate, Jessica O'Connell received a cuddly bear. With that tucked safely under her arms, she was given a very special hug by her mum. Last August, Jessica, then aged 4, awoke to find her mum, Kate, who's a diabetic, unconscious and fitting. She phoned a neighbour who called for an ambulance.
She was so calm. It was no sort of big thing, and she really doesn't understand what all the fuss is about. It was just something that she did.
Do you know what your award's for?
Yes.
What is it for?
For saving Mummy's life.
Ambulance officer David Higgins was the first on the scene. Did she save her mother's life?
Undoubtedly. We feel that if Jessica hadn't done what she did on the day, that her mother may have in fact died.
Also receiving awards today, around 30 ambulance officers, among them John Gleeson, one of 2 paramedics who were in the rescue helicopter when it crashed in the Barrington Tops. John and his partner spent 2 days in the mountains after trying to save an injured bushwalker. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
Businesses are the big winners in the new round of pricing. The drop in non-residential water rates comes from finally eliminating all of the charges linked with property valuation. Businesses are now on the same footing as domestic users, essentially paying in proportion to the water they use. But there's a slight increase in residential charges, up by 0.8%. The marginal rise will mean an additional 8 cents per week for the average household customer. Other changes include an extra 2 cents per kilolitre charged for excess use, an excess charge introduced on business sewer usage, and the phasing in of increased charges for trade waste permits and the discharge of waste material into sewers. Another change linked apparently to the recent bushfire emergency is a reduction in the cost of providing fire hydrants on commercial properties. The State Government Pricing Tribunal says around 1,600 properties will benefit, reducing Hunter Water's revenue by $1.3 million. Melinda Smith, NBN News. As more of our population grows older, the issues surrounding adequate care and the lack of it is creating a major social problem. It's predicted the growth rate of pensioners during the next decade will be around 20%, placing a heavy demand on hostels, retirement villages and nursing homes. That's worsened by the lack of government funds and strict regulations.
Very big problem, because you could not expect a person, particularly a person who relies totally on their pension repayment, to pay for themselves in the care program of a hostel or nursing home.
The Royal Freemasons Benevolent Institution is one of the state's largest providers of aged care facilities. Around 80 administrators are in Newcastle for a 2-day look at directions and demands towards the year 2000, including dementia and Alzheimer's disease.
Because as we're living older, we're needing the care for as our memory fades, and there's some really sad cases that are people that are suffering from Alzheimer's, and that's our direction.
The event coincides with tomorrow's official long-awaited opening of extensions to the Hawkins Masonic Village, 32 self-care units, most spoken for during the planning stages. Melinda Smith, NBN News. The idea of planting and propagating has been adopted by many schools, these teachers learning some pointers on the next step of the cycle, collecting seeds. They're just some of nearly 100 delegates looking at a range of environmental issues at Tokau College near Maitland.
And working with them, so again Streamwatch gives them information.
Focusing on a number of problems in the Hunter, including water salinity and blue-green algae, the advice is a joint approach.
We need cooperation and coordination between agencies, and in the Hunter we've got that very well with the Hunter Catchment Management Trust and its coordination role and the intensive work it does all around the Hunter Valley.
Dr Diana Day is in charge of finding ways to better manage the state's water resources. She believes the solution needs to go beyond the textbook.
We've got to look at communities and government organisations and industries and see how we can coordinate our actions and cooperate to get things done. Things get only done through people, not through plans, not through textbooks and not through looking at streams.
Melinda Smith, NBN News. When 18-month-old Latika broke her leg 2 weeks ago, she had to leave her Gosford home for treatment at the John Hunter Hospital. Thanks to the Ronald McDonald House, Mum and Dad were able to stay with her during the ordeal.
They usually come from country areas, and that means that if there was no Ronald McDonald House, they'd have to stay somewhere like a hotel or a motel. So having Ronald McDonald House just means that it's very handy for them, and it keeps the family together at a time which is very stressful.
Since opening 3 years ago, around 620 families have stayed at the house.
To run Ronald McDonald House costs in the vicinity of $100,000 a year. There's a lot of money to be finding year after year.
Because of the growing demand for the specialised accommodation, the house needs 4 more bedrooms and has launched a fundraising campaign.
We ultimately hope to raise about $150,000 to meet the goal. The actual extensions are expected to cost in the vicinity of $285,000. So we've got a long way to go, but we're confident we'll get there.
For Paul and Tracy, keeping the family together has made Latika's recovery a little easier.
Please help them. That's all what I can say. It's great. I reckon there should be more of it.
The Maitland players came out of the traditional team tunnel looking confident for the top of the table clash, but it was the Wanderers who went on the attack. The Blue Bags kept the ball in the Blacks' half by a combination of clever kicking and absolute dominance of the lineouts by its big men. The Wanderers had a chance to convert that field position into points, but the kick went wide. But another penalty provided a 3-point lead. The Blue Bags had all the ball, but continued to butcher its chances. The Wanderers would rue those lost opportunities as Maitland mounted a comeback. The Blacks crossed for 2 tries and kicked 3 penalty goals to go on to win 19 points to 3.
Police say the gunman entered the Caltex service station on the Pacific Highway just before 4:30 this morning. He approached the attendant demanding money from the till and change drawer. He then forced his victim into a back room. After ordering him to close his eyes, he then bashed him in the face with the butt of a sawn-off .22 rifle. The 22-year-old attendant was taken to John Hunter Hospital but was later released. Police say the gunman fled with around $2,000. He's described as in his late teens, of thin build, wearing dark clothing. The third service station armed hold-up in just over a week. Police are investigating a possible connection. Anyone with information is asked to contact Charlestown detectives. Melinda Smith, NBN News. Planning for the Boulder Bay wastewater treatment plant began 7 years ago amid a swell of environmental concern. Protests resulted in an upgrade of the original primary treatment scheme to a secondary treatment facility, now pumping sewage 750 metres out to sea. A joint project by the state government and the Hunter Water Corporation, Minister Virginia Chadwick took today's official honours. With a 40% increase in demand for its services, hundreds of collectors helped lend a hand to the salvos. The Red Shield appeal has become a major fundraiser for an army that rallies whenever it's needed.
In the Lake Macquarie Newcastle area, we will be spending $4.8 million this year on welfare.
Although the final tally won't be known until tomorrow, this year's appeal hopes to raise more than $500,000, the money helping to fund a range of social welfare programs. Firefighters were combing the Newcastle area late this morning, helping the salvos in their annual appeal when the alarm sounded. The blaze quickly took hold of the Merriweather property. In a matter of seconds, it had completely destroyed the unoccupied granny flat. The thick black smoke noticed by another group of volunteer door knockers.
It seemed to go up very, very quickly. It was just hardy planks, and luckily it had a sort of a brick base on it.
We do believe that the young fellow that stayed in there was smoking. He thought he'd extinguished a cigarette, but unfortunately he hadn't.
3 units were called to the blaze, and after extinguishing the fire, it was back to the streets and the job of collecting.
Bud Morton was gunned down while working at the Grange bottle shop at Wyoming last August. 23-year-old Patrick Michael Mills is charged with his murder. Today in Newcastle Supreme Court, the youth who drove the stolen getaway car gave evidence against Mills. He says on the morning of the armed hold-up, Mills brought a shotgun and cartridges to his house. He was carrying the same shotgun when he entered the bottle shop. The youth heard a bang. When Mills returned, he was carrying the gun and cash register. He said he had shot the shop assistant. The accused, Patrick Mills, elected to give his version of events. He told Justice Wood he was not guilty and that he didn't know the gun was loaded. Mills said, "I didn't load, cock or fire the gun. It just went off. It was an accident." He then apologised to Bud Morton's family and started to cry in the dock. Justice Wood is expected to give his verdict tomorrow. Jane Anderson, NBN News.
Joan Duncan desperately wants her jewellery back. Last night, a man dressed in black with a jacket over his head used a key hidden outside to gain access to her house. She was in bed with the light on watching television when he came into her room.
And he just hurried into the bedroom, took my purse off the bed and hurried out. And I thought he was joking.
The thief wasn't kidding around. He knew what he was after. In the handbag were personal papers, $10 and 8 diamond rings valued at around $50,000. They included Mrs. Duncan's engagement, wedding and eternity rings.
I've lost my husband 15 months ago, and we had a wonderful life together. And I didn't want to lose those.
The rings weren't insured, but it's not the money which has so upset Mrs. Duncan. Police have asked people to keep a lookout for the rings, which were in a beige-coloured pattern handbag. Jodie McKay, NBN News. You can never really be sure what will happen when you interview a comedian, and talking to this pair was no exception. Hung Lee and Joe Perrone are part of the 5-member cast of Wagorama, which opens at the Civic Theatre next week. It's a funny show about a very serious subject.
It's really about, you know, everyone living in Australia being the same, really, all being of different races, but really being the same, and that message is really put across.
Hung and Joe were in Newcastle promoting Wagorama, which is in the same vein as Wog's Out of Work and Acropolis Now, giving their Novocastrian audience a taste of what's to come. While the pair is looking forward to performing in Newcastle, they also have other things on their mind for next week.
Look out for us at the clubs.
Yeah, we're nice discos.
By the time brigades reached the Lambton address last night, the fire was out of control. One unit completely gutted, the other 4 damaged by flames, heat and smoke. No one was injured, however an elderly resident with asthma was treated for smoke inhalation. Police believe the fire started in the lounge room of the unit where 39-year-old Susan Anderson lived. She lost everything, including a collection of 5,000 photographic negatives. Just how the fire started, though, police have been unable to determine. This morning they were back at Rudd Street going through the remains. While they were piecing together the cause, residents were making the most of their loss. Most were in a neighbouring unit when the fire started.
A couple of guys walked out, they checked that there was smoke and come running in saying, you know, Susan, your place is on fire. And we didn't believe them, but it was.
Last night was the second time in 24 hours that police have had to attend the Rudd Street unit. On Tuesday night, a 29-year-old Lambton man was charged with trying to break into the flat. He was interviewed by police at John Hunter Hospital, where he was being treated for a stab wound to the arm. Police are continuing their investigations into the fire. Jodie McKay, NBN News.
"62-year-old Bud Morton was shot dead during an armed hold-up at the Grange Liquor Barn at Wyoming last August. In Newcastle Supreme Court today, Justice Wood found Patrick Michael Mills guilty of Morton's murder. It was a verdict Bud's wife, Judy, expected. Mills had demanded the day's takings from Mr Morton while armed with a shotgun. During the 3-day trial, he claimed he didn't know it was loaded. Justice Wood discounted Mills' unsworn statement, saying he was satisfied beyond reasonable doubt that it was Mills who assembled and loaded the gun. Justice Wood added that the weapon discharged when the trigger was pulled by the accused in the excitement or panic of the moment. Married for 40 years, the retired Air Force navigator was only working at the bottle shop to fill in time. Judy Morton says she still hasn't come to terms with the death of her husband. During the trial, Patrick Mills apologised to Bud's wife and family, but when found guilty today of murder, he swore at them as he was led from the dock.
He seemed to have mouthed the word "get effed" as he was walking past.
Mills will be sentenced next Thursday. Jane Anderson, NBN News. Justice Wood said in Newcastle Supreme Court today that Torgai Parmaxis and his accomplice Geoffrey Clark had agreed to commit an armed robbery at a Broadmeadow news agency, a sub-branch of the State Bank. Early on the 21st of May last year, the pair broke into a car at the John Hunter Hospital. They were in the process of stealing it to use in their planned robbery when they were challenged by two security guards. Parmaxis then fired a shotgun. Eric Callan was hit in the back and cheek. He still suffers from his injuries. Justice Wood said, "I have no doubt that armed and prepared as they were, the armed robbery would have proceeded had they not been intercepted in the car park." Torgai Parmaxis was sentenced to a minimum of 7 years jail. Jane Anderson, NBN News.
The Falcons admit when playing a class outfit like the Melbourne Tigers, you need everything going for you. This week, Simpson, Jensen, Kuiper and Grant have been hampered with injuries, making game preparations awkward.
Obviously, when we get down to 8 or 9 guys, we can't really have a full practice. So it is a bit disruptive, but we're going to have to stay focused.
Newcastle's lineup for Saturday night is not yet final. The Falcons lost last weekend by just 3 points, so they're itching for a win playing at home.
As long as we go out there with confidence that we can beat anybody in this league, on any given night you can knock them off. So it'll be a great stepping stone for us to get the win.
The streets of Newcastle have become a little friendlier and safer over the past 3 months. Reverend David Jones and his church at the Royal Followers have taken in the homeless and given them a bed for the night. The former Royal Theatre has been used as a base by the Good Samaritans to help hundreds of these sufferers on the streets. But all that hard work came to an abrupt end yesterday. Reverend David Jones arrived at the Royal to find he'd been locked out of his own church.
Devastated. Everything we'd worked so hard for over several months was ended just so quickly.
The lockout comes after the owner of the building, Malcolm Proctor, called for his $380,000 loan to be paid, which the church couldn't by the June 30 deadline. But Reverend David Jones says the real reason is that his congregation spent more time on the streets than in the pews of the church.
There are a number of reasons that have been advanced, but the one that was emphasised most to me the other night was that we were spending far too much time in our work amongst the needy and those in risk or at risk in Newcastle, and not enough work was being spent on the religious aspect of the work.
Malcolm Proctor says, "I understand the work on the streets is important, but there is no use feeding them if you put them back on the street without changing them. But whatever the reasons, it's going to be a cold night for Newcastle's homeless."
This is the worst time in the year for this to happen. We've got people, up to 15 people a night that sleep in this building, and for them to now be cast out in winter time on the cold streets of Newcastle, I can't think of a greater tragedy.
Richard O'Leary, NBN News.
The Australian hockey team has just completed a successful test series against India, winning 4 of its 5 games. Warren Birmingham from Corrakai near Lismore captained the side, while specialist goalkeeper Newcastle's Stuart Deering impressed in the test played in Sydney. The national team to tour Europe in June was announced this week. Stewart and Warren weren't included.
I was very disappointed. I thought it might have been a typing error of some sort, you know, and when I spoke to Frank, I said, was there a typing error? And he said no.
The 27-year-old was happy with his form and thought the selectors would be too.
To be dropped while I'm playing well and then a guy brought in who hasn't played for 2 years, that's really not a good explanation at all.
National coach Frank Murray praised Stewart's and the team's performances, but believes as an insurance policy against situations like injury, other players need to be given an opportunity to play at the international level. At the end of the day, we as selectors, of which he's one, have to make decisions for the best of the team. About the dropped players, he added, when they have to sit out, they feel they've been hard done by. Coach Murray says Stewart's and Warren's omission isn't necessarily permanent. The pair remain in the national squad and will be considered for selection in the Australian team for the World Cup to be played in Sydney in November. The event follows the same formula as last year, a challenging course on closed forest roads near Wyong, bringing an almost certain guarantee of spectacular action. Gosford driver Ron Kremen, seen here in car number 3, will this year be driving a Japanese Subaru Impreza, one of only 2 in the country that have been purpose-built for rallying. Kremen, the reigning New South Wales champ, will be out to defend his home event. But hot on his heels is Newcastle's Michael Guest, who's dominated the first 2 rounds of the state championship. 64 cars from all over the state have registered for the 2-day event, which starts at 9:45 from Batteau Bay tomorrow morning. Catherine Lamond, NBN News.